Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Jones, Managing Director of Impact Minerals Limited, listed on the ASX under code IPT, and we are in the high purity alumina space, and we've just announced a transformational acquisition which is going to accelerate our path to production.
You have indeed. Congratulations, and hello, Mike. Right, well, let's get into it, because I think people are going to be intrigued about, how you pick this up, and more importantly, what sort of strategic and commercial benefit it holds for you. So maybe let's talk about what you've picked up first.
Yeah, sure. So we announced today that we are going to be basically joint 50% owners with a group of other investors in a private company called Hipura Proprietary Limited, and that was a subsidiary of Chemex Materials Limited, which was listed on the ASX. Now, both of those companies went into administration in January, and we've been working on the deal to acquire Hipura since then. And the reason for that is that Chemex was in the high purity alumina space like ourselves. And for those that have followed the story, we are using a natural feedstock from Lake Hope here in Western Australia. And our plan was to produce high purity alumina by a variety of leaches, including hydrochloric acid leach, and we're coming to the end of a pre-feasibility study on that, which has got some very encouraging numbers. However, Chemex was looking at an alternative route, which is a chemical feedstock with a solvent extraction process, which is actually the bedrock of Alpha HPA Limited's success, and they've been phenomenally successful in this space over the last 5 years with $1 billion market cap currently. And we'd been watching Chemex and what they were doing. We kind of liked what they were doing, but it didn't seem that the company was being run that very well. And we'd been watching for 6 months, and it was clear that basically they took on debt early on in the piece. It took them longer to get to produce high purity alumina. And as a result, by that time, they were so far in the hole, they couldn't raise any money to get out of the debt. And so they went under. So we took a look at the whole situation, the finances of the company, and in particular the technical aspects of Hipura, and we really liked what we saw. There's a couple of advantages which we could talk about, but in particular, we believe at this stage that there's the strong possibility that we can bolt on the Hipura to our Lake Hope project and provide material for their particular process. As I mentioned, it's currently using a chemical feedstock, which costs, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, per tonne, and we might be able to provide feedstock at a cheaper price from Lake Hope. But that's really secondary to what it's offering us to get into the market a lot quicker than we'd planned under our current business plan. So that's a bit of the background, and it's been an interesting process going through the administrator and the bidding process, but we've ended up coming out on top it was a very competitive process, and so we're very happy with the result.
So I need to talk about Hipura and Chemex, okay? One, because it's private, people won't know it. But when you say something's gone into administration, it suggests a bit of that. So you're saying is entirely caused by the fact they took on debt too early, weren't able to produce revenues to kind of pay down that debt or even restructure that debt. This has nothing to do with its technical capability or the fact that no one wanted what they're capable of producing in the market.
100%. And we'd also been watching Chemex from afar, and I laugh only because it had been a revolving door of senior management over the last couple of years. And so there was obviously personality issues in there and not a lot of progress on the chemistry. But we can talk about that chemistry now, because what they had demonstrated was that their process worked at a micro plant scale. And we're talking something that's literally the size of a bench top. And that's what they'd got. And so they then spent the majority of the money that they owed building a pilot plant. And that pilot plant has the capacity to produce at least 25 tonnes per annum of high purity alumina, and potentially more if it's run in a semi-continuous fashion. And they were so close to commissioning. So basically everything but the electricals has been installed, and the electrical wiring is basically all there, needs to be plugged in. There's a bit more work to be done, but basically the plant is very close to being switched on and commissioned. And it's an amazing, pristine area. There's photographs in our announcement today of it, and you walk around it and you can't fail to be impressed with what they've built there, and the potential for that plant to produce significant quantities of high purity alumina. So
give me an idea of the estimated timeline from pilot plant to commissioning.
I'd probably say 3 to 6 months, just to be on the safe side.
So not insignificant, but okay, something like that. And then the idea typically with pilot plants is to kind of go into some kind of commercial production. And you reckon 25 tons. What does that equate? Give people a sense of what that means in dollar terms potentially at today's prices if it gets up there.
Look, it's a pilot plant as opposed to a truly commercial plant. But depending on how much material you're supplying to customers, you can charge for that, for that material. So, if you use a basket price of say $20,000 US, it's not a huge amount of revenue, okay? But that's not the purpose of the pilot plant as such. It's to do two things. One, to show that the process operates at a scale larger than the market plant. And then two, also produce material in reasonable quantities. And again, I refer back to Alpha HPA. It's quite interesting when you look at their history over the last few years. I don't think in terms of test material, they've had more than like 10 tons of material out at any one time into the marketplace for test work. And the thing that we learned on our journey was that the customers really won't take you seriously until you've got that pilot plant. If they're thinking of changing their supply chain, they want to make sure that you're going to be there and you're not just turning up with something that's the size of a bench. And so this pilot plant is basically on the verge of that. We think it can produce a lot more than that, which would give us, I wouldn't say semi-commercial, but certainly gives us a foothold into the marketplace. And significantly, compared to any other competitors in the HPA space on the market, in the ASX market, we're now just behind Alpha. We're right behind Alpha. I mean, obviously they're trying to scale up, but no one else that's in the HPA space has either got a pilot plant or can produce anywhere near that kind of quantity. So we've taken a huge step forward over our peers, as well as a huge step forward in terms of the time it's going to take us to get to production. Assuming that the pilot plant works and there's obviously risk involved, then we will then scale up to the next stage as part of a broader business plan, probably focused on North America, but we can talk about that as we go along.
Well, okay. Well, let's kind of stick with that at the moment. I'm trying to sort of understand the addressable market for you. You've got the likes of Alpha HPA. You've got Altec Chemicals as well. I think it's another Aussie group who's sort of similar-ish. But how does this technology that you were so keen to get a hold of compare in terms of cost, scalability, purity, etc.? Will you be competing with them, or are you addressing a slightly different audience?
No, we will be competing with them. Just FYI, so Altec pulled out of the HPA business some time ago because one of our largest shareholders is actually a significant shareholder in Altec and helped them with their setup in Germany, with their sodium ion batteries that they're now into. That's their main kind of business.
Yeah.
And when I was doing my due diligence on Lake Hope a couple of years ago, one of the big challenges, as it is for any industrial mineral, is getting the balance between offtake and access to debt in order to be able to build your plant. And that's actually what brought Altec undone. They sort of appeared out of nowhere. They bought a facility in Malaysia, had the concrete poured, and then suddenly kind of needed access to $350 million to build their plant. And guess what? No offtake agreements, and so it all fell in a heap. And he was able to pivot into batteries. So it was a very sensible move.
Gotcha. Sorry, I hadn't picked up. They dumped it completely. Okay, yeah. So that's off the table. Okay, less competition. Good for you.
It's an important thing for this reason, is that the Hipura process, as we understand it right now, is actually modular. Okay, we believe that we can build 1,000 ton, 2,000 ton, 3,000 ton per annum, depending on how the economics work, at a lot less capital expenditure than, let's say, Alpha, who are looking to build a 10,000 ton per annum plant, where they've had to borrow $400 million dollars from the Australian government at low interest, because they've done a fantastic job of marketing what they do. Even though they haven't got offtake, they've been able to get access to these funds with no offtake, which is actually a miracle, and I applaud them. It's fantastic work, and it's a beautiful facility they have. And so our chemical process, the solvent extraction, is actually similar to theirs, but the secret is that we believe that it's modular, and so we can build smaller plants around the world at much less capital cost, and is therefore solves one of the problems of being in industrial minerals.
Okay, so we'll come back to scaling strategies in a second, but just sticking with that offtake comment, because you said Altec failed because no offtake. You've got Alpha, who've got the money, but pre-meaningful offtake as well. So, what does that tell us about the marketplace, and how do you sort of overcome that issue?
Well, again, referring back to Alpha, it has definitely for them been a case of if you build it, they will come. So they've actually announced to the market that whilst they're building a 10,000 tonne per annum plant, they've actually had indications of plus 30,000 tonnes of demand overall. So yeah, they're reasonably confident of actually, I guess filling their plant. They have the ability to make a few other products, some of which we can now make, others I don't think we can. But the majority of their HPA, they're just run-of-the-mill HPA. They're getting indicative demand well in excess of what their plant can produce. So it's a case of let's see what's out there.
It's a brave man who backs indicative or LOIs. But okay, we shall see. Build it and they shall come, and it may work. Who knows?
No, absolutely, and we hope it works. The way I look at it is that, and Hyperion, if you're familiar with them, the titanium.
Hyperion X, yeah, we know them very well. Yeah.
If you look at Hyperion and Alpha, they've both got $1 billion market caps on virtually no sales, and I view it a bit like the discovery of like a Hemi, 10 million ounces of gold, or Chalice when they'd made their discovery. They all had $1 billion market caps, and yet we're years away from production, years away from anything, because people are building on the value that's potentially there should they be able to dig it out of the ground. And so I think there's a lot of similarities in how the market's viewed those two particular companies with a fantastic process breakthrough.
Yeah, but it's also possibly it also makes things difficult for you, because if those guys don't start delivering the potential which they've sold in terms of revenue, actually sales, people might be a little bit more skeptical for the people who kind of come behind. So we need all of the above to work for sure. But I want to see those guys get a move on. So, the Hyperion X, etc.
Great observation, and there's a few brokers that that have expressed similar views. That have got these big market caps, but can they ever deliver and fill it?
There's a lot of backfilling to happen there.
That's right.
Which is I think, coming to this kind of scaling strategy. You talked about this, modular expansion in different locations, different geographies. I guess different funding solutions as a result. Tariffs, obviously a big conversation at the moment. I don't know if you've heard about them. The US has, talking about they want to kind of onshore or reshore in some cases a lot of technology around critical minerals. There's a Section 232 out at the moment looking and evaluating what that means and how they're going to approach that. And I think some sort of decision in October later this year. But for companies like you, this kind of scaling strategy of we will go to where it is needed, that may solve for a lot of those tariff issues, one suspects. But tell me about how you go about finding the partners to do that once you get this pilot plant up and running.
Yeah, well, it all comes down to access to capital, and we've obviously announced today that there are a couple of North American investment groups that are involved. One is Amvest, an Amvest fund is going to be an investor in Aluminous. And there are other groups in there as well. So they're going to bring, significant capital, but in particular, access to capital as we go, further down the track, and in North America in particular, for all of the reasons, the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the emerging uses, for HPA is in the semiconductor industry, both in the semiconductors themselves, but also in particular in the slurries that they use to polish the wafers that go into the semiconductors. And that's where Alpha have announced a significant letter of intent for 4,000 tonnes, relatively recently. And so, our knowledge at the moment, which is growing, we don't have all the answers, is that North America would look to be the place to go, to do the next stage up from the pilot plant. And the longer term view of the North American groups is that let's look to perhaps list on an exchange up there if the opportunity arrives, and get the access to capital to either build the next stage plant or raise it privately, and then try and and then look to list. So we'll just see how that.
So that listing would be with Illuminous, not Impact.
No,
you're talking about Impact as well.
That's at this stage. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, fine. Because it can be expensive in North America, but if you can raise enough money, not a problem. So that sounds like quite a big market, addressable market in terms of semiconductors and batteries and LEDs, etc. Do you, or are you starting to kind of get a sense of what the opportunity might be there with your new partner in Illuminous?
We've been head down trying to do 2 deals in the last 3 weeks, and which has all come to fruition. And I think I've aged a little bit during that process, but we finally came out and announced it to the ASX today. Look, the two of the people involved actually started Connex, and they were victims of some of the internal strife that went on. They were bidding against us at one point, and we decided to join forces to ensure that we got the technology. The technical officer there, it's actually his patent that Hipura has, but he has no claim on it. Part of his deal was it went into Hipura. So he's coming on board. And then the original MD, who's actually had spent a lot of time marketing, and making all those initial contacts, he's in there as well. And they're going to be running the company, as a private, as a private entity, which will ease up a lot of the reporting that I have to do to the ASX. So having those guys there, plus their relationship with the American investors, is a great thing, for Impact, basically to ride on the back of to start off with and see what happens.
Okay, and so let's be clear about what you picked up. You picked up the IP, and obviously there's a bunch of kit there as well, and in the sense of the pilot plant setup. But in terms of the people, or the people coming over, I know you mentioned those two guys, but senior management, in terms of the day-to-day operational side of things, are you picking up some of the people who used to work there, or are they long gone?
A couple of them are long gone. There's one that's a possibility. We have already identified a couple of key people that have experience in solvent extraction. That David, the incoming CEO for Illuminous, that he's identified. We're hopeful, putting our foot on those guys. And don't forget that on our side as well, we have Scott and Eugenia Fegan, who between them have got 50, 60 years of alumina experience, including their own high purity processes. They've built plants for Alcoa and alumina refineries. They're pretty experienced chemical engineers. So we've certainly got the right team on board between us to put the few last wires in and then turn it on. But there's a little bit of capital expenditure. Just very briefly, the back end of the system needs a little bit of capital, talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get it to produce what the front end can get to them. So, but apart from that, there's very little to do. Yeah.
Okay, and look, you obviously it's 50-50. So, can you just remind me the number? Because I'm trying to work out what the return on that capital invested could look like for you guys. And I know we haven't even kind of dived into these sort of, you said it will accelerate your timelines, which is always good to hear. What does this 50-50 JV look like financially? What did he pay for this stuff? What's the relationship look like going forward? I mean, they're talking, obviously, a big game in North America, but for you, what are your liabilities? So
the purchase price was 2.2 million, split 50-50. So our contribution to that is 1.1. And then there's a further $1 million of working capital that we've both committed to. Again, half 50-50, so 500 is our component, so 1.6 in total. And then after that, and the purpose of that is that'll get the plant to the stage where it's up and running, it's commissioned, it looks like it's working. And again, going back to Alpha, one thing we learned with their solvent extraction process is that it just doesn't go from woe to go in one hit. It'll take some time to, ramp it up, get that purity up, make sure everything's running smoothly, so, and that's hence my sort of, 3 to 6 months, without over promising in get into that.
Okay.
So look, that's where it is. And then from there, whatever it costs. But, we fully intend to keep our 50% shareholding. There'll be a group of other shareholders that come in, and they'll fund themselves as they go along.
Right. Okay. And so the purpose of this pilot plant is to create batches which can be tested by potential off-takers, leading to hopefully some kind of long-term kind of commercial off-take agreement, right? That's what we're trying to do here, folks. Okay, so it's good news. You're okay. Well done on that one. Now let's, if you don't mind, let's see how that kind of then joins up with obviously what's going on at Impact proper. So, do you have any sort of specific technical milestones for validating the Lake Hope feedstock into the Hipura process? And can you get into a bit of detail about what that means in terms of time and what the process looks like?
First thing is obviously Lake Hope is still core to to what we're doing. We have almost finished the pre-feasibility study. I feel like I've been saying that for some time, but that's what happens. Waiting for consultants, financial reports, etc., etc. And look, the numbers on that are very encouraging. And we had a scoping study a couple of years ago. The figures are well within that. We've actually used a high discount rate for the PFS, 10% rather than 8%. And there's some very nice looking numbers in there. So, there's definitely huge value in Lake Hope. There's also significant value in there for the production of potash. We haven't spoken a lot about that. There's almost like a dual feed thing, potential there. So that's core. So the process that we're using, like a number of the other HPA wannabes and some of the groups that are in production are using hydrochloric acid at the back end. It's an established process. It's not without its difficulties, just in terms of safety and the nature of the material that needs to be used there. So we feel that at least part of the process, whether it's the raw ore from Lake Hope or an intermediate product that we produce from one of our early stage leaches, could be a fit as a feedstock for the Hipura process. And that's where the link comes between us. And that's actually something that we can get into very quickly, because in the back of the main pilot plant is that micro plant that I spoke to you about, which is the bench scale thing. That's what they used to get and prove the Hipura process. And so we have the ability to put our material through that at benchtop scale in a very short period of time, and determine how suited the materials are to go into the main process. And in that area, there are some strong links then with our research project that we have with Edith County University underneath the federal government grant that we got as well. So there's a whole lot of synergies and a whole lot of optionality for us now.
Right. So the feasibility kind of coming, but obviously with this acquisition, that wasn't, well, it may have been in the planning for the last few months or so, but sorry?
There was no guarantee.
There's no guarantee, right? Yeah. So it's a question now of trying to understand how the process with Lake Hope needs to be adapted or back engineered. So in terms of that test work that you're going to be doing, I mean, what is the success criteria for you, given your chosen, addressable market that you're going for?
Yep. It comes down to cost and purity. The natural feedstock, by definition, has a whole lot of other metals and elements in it than the chemical feedstock. So we need to make sure that those, actually come out during that process. Hence, one concept we have is one of our intermediate products, which is, much purer than the raw ore, may be more appropriate. And it's all a matter of what cost we can produce and get that material into the process. We believe that it could be cheaper than the chemical feedstock that they're buying, which is a relatively, easily accessible chemical. So that's one thing. The second thing is the purity. We've obviously got to get, 495, as they call it, 99.99 minimum, purity out of our material, compared to the material that they've got in there. And look, we've had a look at the material they produce, and it's incredibly special material, very fine grained, material that's come out of their process. So, yeah, look, we're very hopeful that it's there. Look, if it's not suitable, one of the things about the relationship we have is that we're still free to go and do our own thing with Lake Hope. So let's say, we can do things at a cheaper price or whatever by our process, but it's just going to take us longer to develop. We can continue to, develop that under our research projects. But we need to make some hard decisions, I think, in the next 6 to 12 months about which is going to be the appropriate route to meet. And all I can say is having that optionality is a whole lot better than not having any optionality apart from one. So
okay, but you've got a partner in here, and both sides probably need to ideally agree with the best way forward. You've got Lake Hope, which could be a fantastic feed source. Need to worry about chasing down other sources. So that takes out one hurdle. But this addressable market component, is it possible that you look at a few different addressable markets? So you look at whatever 99.99% might be a route because it's super high margin. But if it can't quite get there, could you sort of drop down a level? What is it?
There's certainly there's a significant market in 3N.
Yeah,
that's your general ceramics. Okay, so we've discovered. I mean, a lot of ceramics makers, alumina ceramics makers, would like to get into the 4N market, but it's a difficult thing to do. And we're seeing this now, in the market on the ASX. That as I said, we're going to jump, right behind Alpha in terms of our ability to produce reasonable quantities of HPA. No one else is close. I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Too many things happening today.
No, I know. Well, it just comes back to that. It's a case of working with a partner to agree the kind of commercial imperative. It's about making money and delaying. Time's money in all of these things. So, how do you go about it? What do those conversations look like? Is there anything in the agreement? And I know you've just concluded and probably sort of last minute joint venture on this, but when do you sit down and say, look, this is the way we need to work together?
Yeah, look, I think I've known Nick well for many years. I mean, not a close friend, but I know him, and I've known David obviously through the things, and certainly no issues working together. And I like their plan. They've got the skills, they've got the background, and they've got a good business plan, which we'll fill in the details, obviously, in budgets and work programs within the next couple of weeks. But the way the joint venture is going to work is that when you're in a 50-50, you can end up getting into all sorts of, problems in terms of, being able to progress things if you're arguing over, what type of tea or coffee that you have, in the office, and if you fall out. So the way we're going to go around that is that we have 2 board members from each group, so 2 from Impact and 2 from the other shareholders. And we are on the search now for a non-executive, but independent chairperson. And, there's going to be great responsibility with that. They will have the casting vote, and we'll do the best thing, by Illuminous underneath the agreed business plan. We decided that was a lot more straightforward than, having a unanimous vote for everything, which just is just a recipe for a lot of butting of heads if things go wrong further down the track. So look, the good thing for Impact is that it won't take a lot of my management time. If we'd have owned it 100%, it's like a lot of responsibility, twice the cost, a lot more management time on the floor, getting that thing up and running. Whereas now we've got people in there. It's going to be run semi-independently and funded, and they can just get on with their business.
Okay, well, let's talk about you've got feasibility study in the works, etc. But with this acquisition, one would expect that there may be some efficiencies to be had. So like performance benchmarks for the pilot plant, cost per ton and yield rates and recovery and all that kind of good stuff. You're going to need to kind of work out, and will that mean a sort of slightly updated feasibility study at some point down the line, or is that something you can quite quickly get to a point where you can adapt the numbers?
The answer is yes to both of those questions. If the Lake Home material works, and we'd be very happy if it does, then we look at the economics of the whole thing. But I would say that it's just an easier route to production, I think, with the solvent extraction than the hydrochloric acid. But it's all about the economics, So and what does that from a technical perspective.
I think that the solvent extraction versus conventional, fine. You're not getting into this with no clue. You're saying you've done this on the basis that the economics will be better. It's a question of how much better.
That's right.
I'm assuming you're not getting blind.
And in particular, the potential modularity. Just to go back to that, when we want to scale up, and there's going to be economies of scale. And I don't really know the numbers at all in terms of what the cost of the Hipura process plants will be, but it is built around this. It's modular, feedstock's relatively available, and gets around the financing issue, as I say. So as we scale up, that's one of the big advantages that we must really investigate in detail. So there may be a feasibility study on a 3,000 tonne per annum plant rather than 10,000, which is what we've used in our PFS. And again, the reason for that is economies of scale, but also it's been apples for apples. That's been the benchmark that people in the HPA business have been trying to get to. Like Alpha, they're building a 10,000 tonne per annum plant, so people can compare it to that. Right. And look, our operating cost, which is a bit higher than in the scoping study, is still well below Alpha's for our Lake Hope material with our conventional process that we're doing. So the numbers look very good even despite that. So,
right, okay. And one assumes I don't know how much time you had to kind of work out this deal, this joint venture, etc. But we look at impact and you go, well, how do we kind of protect impact shareholders? And you go, well, what we don't want is a whole ton of dilution or loss of control if you're unable, for whatever reason, to participate in future capital raises, for instance, stuff like that. In terms of that level of detail, is that something that you will be ironing out, or do you think you kind of got a good handle on?
We've got some principles in there, but and there's plenty of time after a decision to capital raise for us to raise capital, and the others, if they need to raise capital as well. I wouldn't want to give the impression that that there's a pot of gold in North America that anyone can dip into. And look, having halved our expenses by being in the 50-50, we're in a much better position to be able to maintain our equity up until there's some significant point in time, whether it's raising 50 million to build a X thousand tonne per annum. I don't want to be quoted on it. X thousand tonne per annum plant, or enlisting and raising money that way with money coming back to impact. So there's a whole range of options, Matthew, that from a commercial sense is great to have. And it gives us a lot of flexibility now as we move forward in the next 12 months to work out the best path forward.
Okay, and I just want to give you a chance to be so really clear about this, which is obviously this is the new shiny toy is Hipura and your joint venture Aluminous, but you've got a job to do on Lake Hope. You're cracking on with that. Have you got the money to do what you need to do there? Yeah,
we do. I mean, there's a lot of synergies between the research project I mentioned. So we've got a federal government grant. It is not quite dollar for dollar, but almost dollar for dollar basis, which again halves our costs, and that's for the membrane technology. Yeah. So now that's been a little bit quiet in terms of news because Edith Cowan have been appointing people. So they've appointed a world-class researcher who comes to us from the US. He's Iranian originally, and absolutely world-class membrane researcher. There's a couple of PhD students starting because it is a 2 to 3 year project to solve some of the issues. But they've already started design work for Lake Hope on the first membrane for our first stage of bleaching, which produces potash as a primary byproduct. And that potentially has commercial value in its own right, never mind then leading on to the HPA as we move further down the track. So, and we know for a fact that these membranes are applicable in the solvent extraction process. So if you can imagine, that we design a membrane for the last few ppm in the solvent extraction process, we're in a position to produce 6 nines, potentially 5 9 and 6 9 as routine at a much reduced cost. So there are almost too many options, if you like, but look, give us a break. Just putting it all together, we're going to see how it goes forward, and I'm sure something very exciting is going to really drop out of this.
Okay, so let's just kind of finish off, and so because we talked about a lot, maybe just like summarize. Once the kind of deed of company arrangement has happened, what are the kind of next steps in terms of that kind of integration, plant commissioning, marketing, whatever it is that you're going to do this year? What does it look like? This new world that you've created.
Yeah, well, you've just described it. So hopefully we'll take possession of the keys in the next week, and then it'll be a thorough review, of where everything was at when it all went under. And it was a case that we went down to there for the due diligence visits. Wasn't quite cold coffee in the cups, but paper baskets unfilled, and so they just left immediately. So thorough review of that, and then an accurate estimate of the capital and working costs to get it back up and running. If you wanted me to quote, I'd say call it $500,000 out of the $1 million that we're putting in will be sufficient to wire everything in, get it all up and running, get the initial stage of commissioning going, and then it's a case of seeing how long it takes to get the plant to be stable and producing the 4 nines, and that's probably the biggest unknown.
Right.
At this. And
right.
Once we're at that stage, then we're in a position to produce tons of material, and we can hit the marketing hard. And I might have mentioned previously, clients won't take you seriously until you've got this pilot plant. And so as a result, we haven't done a lot of it in Lake Hope, because that was probably going to be at least 12 months, 18 months away before we were in that position, and certainly not to produce it at the scale of 25 tons or more per annum.
Interesting. So it really has changed the whole profile, the timeline for you guys.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, good. And just one final question is, so this transaction, it's clean. You've picked, there's no hidden liabilities down the line, no unresolved IP issues, no legacy contracts still to be negotiated, settled, etc. This is clean.
Absolutely clean. So the money that we give over to the administrator goes to what's called creditors trust. You'll probably be familiar with those, and it's a clean break. No one can come out of the woodwork and say, Hipura still owes me, $250,000 or something like that. All the IP is secured, and away we go.
Nice. Okay. Great update. Well worth the wait. I've been trying to get a hold of you for a while. There's a game changer for you. So, well done, Mike. Well done, Mike. Does speed things up and sort of changes the investment profile for you guys.
Great. Thanks, Matthew.